Hello. Today I want to chat about one of the most interesting archaeological papers I've read in a while. Assembling Ancestors, the Manipulation of Neolithic and Gallo-Roman Skeletal Remains at Pomerol, Belgium? Sorry, I'm not sure how to say that letter. By Barbara Veselka et al. It describes the excavation and analysis of a burial. The body dates to the Neolithic period, about 4,400 years ago. The cranium, the skull, seemingly dates from the Gallo-Roman period, about 1900 years ago. But it's one burial, one body. What's going on with that? Why was this one burial made up of body parts separated by thousands of years? Kind of an interesting topic for today, if you ask me. Kind of interesting. Very peculiar. Pomerol lies in western Belgium, very close to the border with France. According to Wikipedia, it's home to 2,517 people as of 2020, and it just looks like a lovely little village. It has this nice cafe, some charming looking houses, very nice, and an ancient Roman cemetery.
He was a consul of Rome!
He was a consul of Rome. Had to put that in there, sorry. The cemetery was excavated in the 1970s, and all in all, they recovered 76 cremations. Cremation was a pretty typical method of disposing of the dead for Romans. The body would be placed upon a pyre, and after all was said and done, your remains would be gathered up and placed in some form of container. If you were poor, maybe it would just be a humble ceramic jar. Sometimes they're made out of glass, which is absolutely beautiful, incredible that a glass object can survive so long. But if you were richer, they'd be placed in something much more elaborate. This, I found a really beautiful example whilst looking for Roman cremation chests, cinerary chests they're called. I found this beautiful one at the Metropolitan Museum. Absolutely incredible carving. What I absolutely love the most, though, is that it has writing. According to the website, it reads, "To the spirits of the dead, M. Domitius Primogenius made this for himself, his freedmen and freedwomen, and their descendants." I tell you what, there is nothing quite like learning the name of a long dead person. Not some king or general or something like that, but just a random guy. I love it. I love that sensation. I don't know. Probably the Germans have a word for this sensation, but I love learning the name of a long dead person. Salve, Domitius, wherever you are. I hope you had a good life. Anyway, point is, it wasn't a big surprise that in this Roman period cemetery, they found a lot of cremations. Not a big surprise. But archaeologists, of course, found that other burial. They labeled it Grave 26, and it's here where the mystery kind of starts. Interesting grave. What archaeologists didn't find, though, was the Romans' social security numerous. I know. Terrible, I know. I'm sorry. But also, no one's going to find mine, thanks to the sponsor of this video, DeleteMe. More and more of our lives are online, and it's probably shocking how much of our personal information is out there. This information is sold by data brokers to whoever, and it's responsible for a lot of phishing scams, online harassment, stalking, all this nasty stuff, and I'm just not prepared to give up the fight for my privacy. This is where DeleteMe comes in. They can delete all this information from these data brokers' sites. You can see since I've been using it this month, they found information on 37 data brokers and deleted it from 37, which is fantastic. They even found some family members too, which you can also get their help with their family plan. Super easy to use, super intuitive. Honestly, took no time at all to set up. I think if you're worried about how much information is out there online, DeleteMe is a great tool to help with that. Don't give up your privacy just like that, guys. Don't give in to these companies. If that's something you're interested in, you can get 20% off if you go to joindeleteme.com/Stefan Milo. Don't forget to use promo code Stefan Milo at checkout too. There's also a QR code flying around here. Thank you so much to DeleteMe for sponsoring this video. Let's get back to these Frankenstein burials. So Grave 26 was of interest to the researchers in this paper for a number of reasons. First of all, because they were kind of placed tucked up on their side. When Romans buried their dead and didn't cremate them, typically they would be laid flat on their back, as is common now in the West. It's not that people were never buried on their side, but it wasn't typical, and that immediately sort of singled this grave out as an unusual thing in a Roman cemetery. Something's going on with it. It was also uncovered from a deeper stratigraphical layer than all the cremations, so again, not seemingly part of the same burial practice. But most importantly, most intriguingly, it was immediately obvious to the investigators that this body was made up of different people, just based on the size and the development of the bones. They included some pictures. So here are the pelvic bones, seemingly quite different either side of this pelvis. The scapula look different. The feet is where it gets very interesting. So these are 5 adult first right metatarsals. It's this bone in your foot. Obviously, we only have one of these bones, not 5. So very odd, very odd. And then these are apparently 2 children's phalanges at different stages of development. Just based off the body itself, not including the cranium, they estimate that it was made up of at least 7 individuals, because you have the 5 metatarsals and then the 2 phalanges. So this really is a composite burial before we even get to the cranium. Kind of crazy, kind of crazy. Anyway, the bones were sent off for radiocarbon dating, and they dated towards the end of the Neolithic period, about 4,500 to 4,300 years ago. But here's another just mind-blowing thing, to me anyway. The radiocarbon dates don't overlap. For example, 2 of these. So one of those metatarsals from the feet dates to 4,445 years ago, plus or minus 31 years. And then there's the wider age bracket next to it. Another one of them dated to 4,213 years ago, plus or minus 31 years. The lives of these feet, the walking around time of these feet, I'm not sure how to phrase it, was separated by 200 years perhaps. There's such a variation in dates from this radiocarbon testing that the archaeologists believe the bones kind of came from 3 distinct time periods before they were assembled into this grave. All dated to the Neolithic period, but still. It makes you think, when we're imagining like a house or a settlement in the Neolithic period, do they have human remains just to hand? Is there some part of their worldview, spiritual worldview, that requires them to have human remains close to hand? Because you just can't help but think, if they're creating this composite burial out of remains that are separated by hundreds of years, they had to have gotten them from somewhere, right? Maybe when we see like a recreation of a Neolithic house, there's the fireplace, there's the bed, there's the tools. Maybe there should be a skeleton in the corner too. Maybe. They're getting these bones from somewhere. It's an interesting one. As I would learn from reading this paper, archaeologists have found a few other examples of these composite burials from prehistoric Europe. Okay, I found the other 2 examples of these composite burials, as I've been calling them, from the paper, from the research paper, because I think it gives us the clearest example of what might be going on here. So the first example they give us comes from the village of Neep on the Isle of Lewis, Scotland's Western Isles, the Outer Hebrides. Here, archaeologists were excavating a Bronze Age cairn on the edge of a beach, which looks absolutely stunning. Oh my goodness, what a beautiful location to do research. I am 100% confident the wind was howling every day they were there. But gosh, what a rugged beauty it has. So in one trench, dubbed Area A, they found another individual lying on their side. This, upon further analysis, was actually composed of 3 individuals. In Area C, 3 burial clusters were found, again consisting of bones made up of different people. Clearly for this community, this is not an isolated incident. They have some reasoning behind this. The second example also comes from the Western Isles, this time further south on the island of Uist, I believe it's called, South Uist, a place called Clahallen. This dates to the end of the Bronze Age, early Iron Age. This one is the most remarkable of all. You can even tell from the title, mummification. What's going on here? So, in this particular site, bodies were uncovered beneath what would have been the floors of houses. Here, we see burial 2638, a male. This was made up of 3 individuals. The body belonged to one man, the head and the vertebrae came from a second individual, and the jawbone, the mandible, came from a third. Very interesting there. Burial 2613, this one was a female. This at first glance didn't appear to be a composite burial, but genetic analysis later showed that it was. Again, seemingly this burial was made up of 3 individuals. What's so special about this site is the position of the dead. So at Neep Head and at Pomerul, bodies are, they're placed as one burial, but honestly they're not perfect, right? They're placed roughly in their anatomical position. But at Clahallen, they're so tucked up, they're so tucked in together, it's almost like they were bound, which is part of the reason why the authors, including Mike Parker Pearson, my former professor when I was at university, shout out, believes that this may have involved some sort of mummification process. They go into other details about why mummification may have been involved, but that's one of the reasons why they think that. But it just looks like they're really, really trying to create a complete person. Of course, they must have known that these were different body parts, but it just really looks like they're trying to create this complete person, this complete burial. It's so interesting. It's so fascinating, man. What were the ancestors up to? It just shows that, like I mentioned in the Neolithic times, these body parts must have been to hand. They seem to be available when they need to construct a person. I don't think there's any evidence at any of these sites of cut marks or anything like that. It's not like they're going out and getting a person, it seems. It seems like this is all part of the normal, natural way that these communities dispose of the dead. There are probably more examples of this around the world, and I wonder how many examples we have from Neolithic and Bronze Age Europe that just weren't recognized as composite burials. Do you know what I mean? How common is this? Interesting to wonder about. As for why it's happening, it's so difficult to say. It's impossible to say, right? We can't go back and ask them. But there are some ideas, some hypotheses that perhaps these people no longer represented specific ancestors, but that they represented a symbolic ancestor for the entire community, or maybe multiple communities. That this was a way of maybe uniting people on these islands, these different groups, into one shared ancestry. That's basically the hypothesis for why people would go to the effort of creating these burials containing multiple individuals. Well, it's some sort of symbolic ancestor. Who knows? Who knows, right? Whatever spiritual and societal reasons these Neolithic and Bronze Age people had for constructing these bodies, these almost Frankenstein bodies, how did a Roman end up getting involved in all of this? What happened there? So the team in this study tried 3 times to get a radiocarbon date from this cranium, and they failed 3 times. For whatever reason, couldn't get a date from it. Conditions weren't right, preservation wasn't right. So they had to get a little bit more creative. Next to the cranium, they recovered a bone pin. Now this they were able to get a date from, and it dated to the Gallo-Roman period, about 69 to 210 AD. Radiocarbon dates came back as. So, smack bang in the middle of the Roman period. So that's the first clue that this cranium is significantly younger. But they didn't stop there. They actually dated the cranium using DNA. There are various ways you can date something using genetics, but here's how they did it in this study. They compared it to the DNA from 2 siblings who were recovered from another Roman cemetery close by. It's called Tongeren, a place called Tongeren, also in Belgium. These 2 siblings were recovered from a much more secure Roman context. They're confident that these 2 children were from the Roman time period. And comparing the DNA of the cranium to these 2 siblings, they were able to tell that these individuals were separated by 0 to 28 generations, or 0 to 784 years, assuming 28 years roughly per generation. Obviously, that's a very large time span, right? That's not an ideal scenario when you're dating something to have a window of over 700 years. But there's a couple of things to say about it. Let's say they truly are separated by over 700 years. Then the cranium would still be younger than these Neolithic remains by over 2,000 years, 2,500 years. So still, somehow, this cranium has entered this grave after a time span of thousands of years. So even at the extreme end of the dating, it's still incredible. It's still bizarre. Combined with the fact that it was placed next to a Roman pin and it's located in a Roman cemetery, the authors of the paper believe the most likely scenario is that it was assembled during this Roman period. Obviously, this conclusion is not exact, it's not perfect, but it's as close as we can get with the evidence we have. The only sort of question remaining is why. Absolutely beautiful morning out here in the woods. So I've been digging around, just trying to find interesting things to read about the Roman attitudes to death, just to try and understand the motivation of whoever placed that cranium in there, if it was indeed a Roman. And I found this really just interesting short extract from the Oxford Classical Dictionary, and it reads, "In the Roman tradition, death is conceived of essentially as a blemish, striking the family of the deceased with the risk of affecting all with whom it had contact, neighbors, magistrates, priests, and sacred places." I love the idea of a Roman accidentally disturbing this ancient grave. And then by coincidence, everything goes wrong in their life, right? Their wife leaves them, their business fails, their house burns down, their cat dies, all of this stuff. And they immediately, of course, blame the fact that they've disturbed this burial and seek to restore it in any way they could with this cranium, which they got from God knows where, who knows where. Obviously, that's just a fun little bit of speculation. Who knows how it went down in reality. I say God knows where, but the archaeologists do have an idea, do have a hypothesis. Apparently, one of the cremations next to Grave 26 had some flint artifacts in it, which probably not typical for a Roman burial. And so the hypothesis is a Roman digging a grave, perhaps, disturbed this cremation, disturbed this Neolithic burial, and hastily reassembled them before they felt the wrath of the gods. Reassembled them incorrectly, of course, totally unaware that the original burial was also a Frankenstein of different body parts. What an odd piece of history. What a very small, odd piece of history. It's very interesting, though. Don't humans do some funny old stuff?